On December 18th, 2020, late morning in the city of Nizhny Novgorod, a quiet street named Swatinskaya, where few passers-by ever stroll. From a small playground there drifted the laughter of a girl and the creaking of swings. Moments later, this calm was shattered by 3 rapid gunshots. A woman collapsed face first into the snow. A little girl stood a few steps away, frozen in place, no scream escaping her lips, just silently staring. The man with the gun took a step back, pointed the pistol at himself, and pulled the trigger. It all unfolded in seconds. Later, the witnesses would say they heard muffled voices just before the shots. The woman spoke calmly. She was trying to leave. But she didn't make it in time. The first shot rang out after she turned away. Neighbors rushing from their homes saw only the bodies on the ground and the young girl standing alone on the playground. The police arrived quickly. The girl was taken to a patrol car. On the snow remained the imprint of her little boots and a dark stain beside it. At that moment, no one yet realized this disaster was the final act of years of fear, repeated warnings, attempts to protect oneself, and simply survive. To understand how it all came down to 3 gunshots on a quiet street, we need to go back to the beginning of this story. Morning of December 18th, 2020 began for Tatiana Timofeyeva like any other. She was getting her daughter ready, preparing breakfast, checking her messages, but behind the calm facade lurked anxiety. The day before, she'd again contacted the police. In her report, she said her former husband was threatening her, but the authorities refused to open a criminal case, citing insufficient evidence. It wasn't the first time she'd been turned away. That day, Tatiana agreed to meet with Vyacheslav, who insisted on seeing his daughter. She consented, but with conditions. The meeting would take place only with her present and in a public, open space. She feared him, yet she couldn't fully forbid him from seeing his daughter. Early afternoon, they met near the house on Swatinskaya Street, close to the playground. Before the meeting, Tatiana switched on voice recording on her phone. This conversation would later be key evidence. Their voices sounded calm, but the man's words carried menace. "I've got a gang of hitmen," he said. "They've been paid a lot of money. They'll destroy your family." "Are you out of your mind, Slav?" she asked. He kept going, as if oblivious to her question. "See this ring? It's from a grenade. It's worth it." Tatiana tried to stay steady. She spoke softly, asked him not to scare the girl. The man answered in choppy phrases, no logic in his words, only pressure and fear. Hours before that conversation, Tatiana messaged a friend. "Every day feels like I'm sitting on a powder keg." She sensed the situation was spinning out of control. Her friend urged her to leave, but Tatiana feared that might provoke him. When the phone recording ended, the woman had just enough time to send it to her brother, a law enforcement officer. It was her final cry for help. No one close to her knew at the time that this audio file would become the last living document of her story. That day would be her final one, and it proved something chilling. The hope of resolving things peacefully, even until the very end, can sometimes turn out to be fatal. To understand who he truly was behind closed doors, we have to look at the image he carefully built for the world. Vyacheslav Timofeyev was born on February 27, 1981, in Nizhny Novgorod. From a young age, he was drawn to sports. Soccer wasn't just a hobby, it became his whole identity. Teachers noticed his discipline, drive to be the best, and natural leadership. As a member of his school's team, he often earned top placements in city tournaments, dreaming of one day becoming a professional athlete. But everything changed after a serious injury. Months of recovery wiped out any chance of a pro career. Still, Vyacheslav didn't let go of sports. He enrolled in Nizhny Novgorod State University, majoring in physical education. Even then, he stood out, persistent attention-seeking, and skilled at making a strong impression. After graduation, he started working as a coach. Along with a friend, he opened a youth soccer academy called Volga Kids. The project gained traction fast. His teams began competing in regional and national tournaments, and Vyacheslav quickly developed a reputation as a successful mentor. Parents trusted him with their sons and daughters, and colleagues described him as someone who knew how to keep discipline. He cultivated the image of a tough but fair coach, confident, energetic, and inspiring. Over time, the academy became a well-known name around Nizhny Novgorod. To locals, Vyacheslav was a self-made man. He frequently appeared in photos with young athletes, helped organize tournaments, and received heartfelt thanks from parents. In public, he was polite, cheerful, with not a trace of aggression. No one would have guessed that beneath the surface lay a deep-seated need to dominate and control. Among friends and colleagues, he was respected. He didn't drink, stayed focused on work, and lived the life of a health-conscious athlete. His social media was filled with posts about his family, sports, and coaching career. Standing next to him in many photos was Tatiana, young, beautiful, a successful designer. Their public image was one of a perfect couple. Photos from tournaments and events radiated harmony and stability. To those who only knew him on the field, it was hard to imagine that outside the spotlight, Vyacheslav could become a man who couldn't manage his own emotions. The confidence and desire for control that worked for him professionally slowly bled into his personal life. Vyacheslav was used to being the authority, in the team, in the home, in the community. And when that authority was questioned, irritation flared up. That's when the seeds of what would later define his relationship with his wife began to take root, an obsession with total control. Colleagues recalled his sudden outbursts, moments when things didn't go exactly as planned. But just as quickly, he'd return to his usual friendly self, and those flare-ups were written off as minor quirks of personality against the backdrop of his many good qualities. These moments barely registered. One acquaintance put it this way: he was always about action. He wasn't a hateful guy. He just believed things had to be done his way. That quote would go on to define a man who was used to bending the world around him to his will. Outwardly, he looked like the perfect family man, a respected coach, a loving father. But beneath that image grew a hunger for control and the belief that he had the right to make decisions for everyone around him. In public, he came off like a model husband, but behind closed doors, any disagreement felt to him like a direct threat to his authority. This contrast went unnoticed for a long time. To the outside world, Vyacheslav Timofeyev was accomplished and admired. But inside the home, a very different reality was taking shape, one no one around him ever saw. Tatiana Dobrovolskaya was born and raised in Nizhny Novgorod. From an early age, she had a passion for art and fashion. She loved sketching clothes and coming up with designs. By the time she was 8, she had sewn her first dress. After high school, she enrolled in a vocational program for sewing and tailoring, and soon after opened her own studio. Clients loved her for her refined taste and meticulous attention to detail. Eventually, Tatiana launched her own clothing line under the name Timofeeva. Her work struck a balance between elegance and practicality. She was driven and always eager to grow, participating in runway shows, collaborating with designers, and believing deeply in the power of hard work to transform a life on social media. She often posted about creativity, love, and family. Long before the tragic events that would claim her life, she once wrote, "I know a lot about self-esteem and self-love. Because I have known so much of the opposite, I know what it means to betray yourself every day just to seem like a good person." That line would later come to symbolize everything she endured. Tatiana met Vyacheslav when she was 16. 2 years later, they got married. At first, It looked like a picture-perfect love story. Smiling selfies, sweet captions, posts about marriage and togetherness. She wrote about partnership and mutual respect. In one post, she quoted her husband. "He says he'll still love me, even when I'm old and heavier. The only thing that matters is being close." But over time, the tone of her posts began to shift. She started writing about patience, exhaustion, and the importance of staying calm. One caption read, "My husband and I never fight. It's just that we don't see the point in arguing over who's right or wrong." Behind that sentence was another truth: constant tension and the quiet pressure to watch every word. Her loved ones noticed the change. Tatiana became more withdrawn, avoided talking about the future, and steered away from any conversation about her family. The first signs of trouble surfaced during her pregnancy. She confided that her husband would become irritated for no reason, monitoring her every move. After their daughter was born, his aggressive behavior intensified. He'd yell at the girl, say she wasn't right, and call her a failed mistake. Tatiana started keeping a journal. In those pages, she wrote about fear, guilt, and helplessness. It was her only outlet, a space where she could process what was happening, and even there, she didn't lash out or blame him. She just tried to understand what she had done wrong. She worked hard to keep up the appearance of a normal life, sewing, taking on clients, smiling in photos. But beneath that smile, two things kept her going: her daughter, and a fear so constant it had become a part of her daily life. It was that fear that sparked her plan to escape. When her home no longer felt like a safe place, Tatiana realized staying meant putting herself at risk. Leaving wasn't a sudden impulse. For nearly 9 months, she quietly mapped out her exit, building a plan to save herself and her daughter, one careful step at a time. The first move was to sell the apartment she had purchased before their marriage. She did it discreetly, through a realtor she trusted, making sure Vyacheslav wouldn't catch wind of the deal. The money went toward a new place, and she kept the address hidden, even from those closest to her. The apartment was across town, and renovations had already begun. Quietly, without signs, without calls, all handled by friends and low-profile contractors. She started moving their things out little by little, bag by bag, never enough at once to raise suspicion: her daughter's toys, paperwork, clothes. A close friend, one of the few she confided in, later said every detail was carefully planned, down to spare keys and the times Vyacheslav would typically be away from home. This wasn't a rash decision. For her, escaping was the only way to survive. The move happened on February 2nd, 2020. That day, she picked up her daughter, leaving most of the furniture behind. She turned off her phone temporarily to throw him off. Her friend helped with the move. That night, in the new apartment, they finally slept. Really slept. For the first time in a long while, it was a fragile illusion of safety. But at the time, Tatiana believed the worst was over. Within days, Vyacheslav realized they were gone. He started frantically calling friends, relatives, anyone who might know where they were. It later came to light that he'd secretly been tracking Tatiana's social media activity, reading into her posts, and trying to extract information from mutual acquaintances. Her escape triggered his obsessive need to regain control. After relocating, Tatiana tried to stay cautious. She didn't block him from seeing their daughter, but insisted on being present for any visits. In May, she let her guard down, trusting him with a short visit alone. That decision would turn out to be a devastating mistake. Vyacheslav used the opportunity to take the girl and hide her at a relative's house. Tatiana reached out to the police, but was met with indifference. She refused a formal medical exam, afraid of public exposure and legal pressure, a decision that ultimately prevented Vyacheslav from being held accountable. At the time, despite her fear, she kept pushing forward. She went back to work, restarted her business, exchanged messages with lawyers, gathered evidence for court, but Vyacheslav kept closing in. He called her, sent threatening messages, showed up near her apartment. That escape, the one she had planned so carefully, marked a turning point. It drew a clear line between her dream of a new life and the painful reality she couldn't escape. Behind even the thickest door, safety remained just out of reach, and soon it would become clear that law enforcement never truly listened. And that's why all her efforts in the end weren't enough. To understand why the system failed to protect Tatiana, we need to take a closer look at how law enforcement responded to her pleas for help. After she fled, Tatiana kept reaching out to the authorities. She made phone calls, filed reports, walked into the same precinct where her case was known. But every time, it came down to one thing: not enough evidence. Officially, the threats didn't qualify under any criminal statute, and there were no documented physical injuries. In practice, it meant there was no protection. One of her first reports involved property damage. One night, all 4 tires on her car were slashed, but no case was opened. They claimed there was no proof he had done it. She was told to handle it privately. In another incident, she reported being followed and threatened, but the officers responded with, "He hasn't done anything yet." Without physical harm or undeniable evidence, they said there was no basis for a case. None of her reports ever made it to court. The attorneys Tatiana consulted explained that the legal system for protecting victims of domestic aggression in Russia was practically non-functional. Without a medical report and visible injuries, a statement held no legal weight. Even a restraining order, a common legal tool in many countries, doesn't exist in Russian law. Tatiana knew she was trapped between law and bureaucracy, a place where justice had no footing. Vyacheslav, emboldened by this lack of accountability, only became more hostile. He sent threatening, insulting messages, writing that he could do whatever he wanted. When Tatiana tried to involve the police over inappropriate messages he had sent their daughter, the request was denied. They said a digital forensics exam would be too complex and raised too many questions. Her brother, Valery Byron, worked in law enforcement. He understood the system from the inside and had repeatedly advised her to record conversations with her ex. He admitted there was little police could do without clear signs of physical harm. On paper, they had no reason to detain him or place any restrictions, Valerie said. Until there's blood, there's no case. Those words turned out to be prophetic. The law didn't offer mechanisms to protect women in her position. Even with the threats, recordings, and written statements, the process got stuck in paperwork. Police followed protocol, but never stepped in to prevent real danger. For Tatiana, it was the final devastating realization. She was truly alone in this fight. The very system that was meant to protect her had turned away. And when she heard his voice again, full of threats, full of the confidence that nothing would happen to him, there was no one left to intervene. From there, everything happened fast. She never had the chance to file one last report. The conversation began calmly, just like so many before it. Tatiana knew she was taking a risk by meeting with him, yet she still came, for the sake of her daughter, for the sake of keeping some kind of boundaries in place. Before she approached him, she started recording on her phone with a familiar motion, as if it had become part of her survival routine. She didn't know she was capturing the final minutes of her life. The man spoke with confidence, almost too much of it. There was no shouting in his voice, only a cold, deliberate certainty. He talked through details that sounded like a script planned well in advance. He mentioned people he claimed to have paid to take out the family, talked about his weapon, about a grenade, as if trying to convince not her but himself that everything was under control. Tatiana didn't raise her voice. She understood all too well that any emotion might be interpreted as a challenge. Her answers were short and restrained, filled more with confusion than fear. She tried to steer the conversation back to their daughter, back to reason, back to anything that might calm him down. But the longer they spoke, the clearer it became. He hadn't come to talk. He'd come to finish something he had been planning for a long time. The recording captures her attempts to keep the conversation peaceful. She reminds him about their daughter, about the need to speak calmly. But underneath her voice is the quiet realization that there is no way back. His tone grows harder, his words precise, like a final judgment. He repeats that everything is decided, and there's no threat in his voice. Only fact. This meeting wasn't an emotional outburst. It was methodical, cold pressure. He listed his supposed proofs of power, referenced his weapon, hinted at connections and money, building a suffocating atmosphere of inevitability around her. Every point he made led to one message: she had no chance. Several times, Tatiana tried to bring the conversation back to their daughter, the only place where something human might still exist. She told him that the girl needed a father, that visits were possible if things stayed calm. But nothing she said reached him. He wasn't listening anymore. His answers became shorter, his pauses longer. Only a few minutes had passed since the start of the recording. But in those minutes, you can hear the entire dynamic of a relationship that once looked like a family, from silent fear to the realization of the inevitable. Tatiana managed to send the recording to her brother and a few close relatives. Maybe she sensed that the conversation wouldn't be the end of it. For her, the recording wasn't just evidence. It was a way to leave a trace if something irreversible happened. Minutes after the audio cut off, he pulled out the weapon. It happened right near the playground where their daughter had been playing. A few short sounds, and then silence. This conversation became the final line, the point beyond which there were no more pleas, no more explanations. It wasn't a sudden impulse, but the final act of control by a man who had long believed he ruled everything and everyone around him. And the recording Tatiana made now plays like a timeline of fear, the kind society so often dismisses as a family issue. The tragedy unfolded in broad daylight, right in front of people passing by. Investigators would later confirm that he pulled out the weapon just as Tatiana began to step away. He fired at her from behind. It all lasted less than a minute. She passed instantly. Vyacheslav ended his own life seconds later. Hours after the incident, a scheduled post appeared on his social media page. "Remember us this way. 19 years, from the first kiss to the last. Today is the finale. Pride destroyed us both. Score 0-0. But we were happy. Cherish love." Beneath the text were family photos and 2 songs. The post had clearly been prepared in advance, as if he'd been planning this ending long before that day. The next day, Tatiana's body was released to her family. Her funeral took place on December 22nd. Dozens of people from Nizhny Novgorod came, neighbors, clients from her studio, friends. Many said they still couldn't believe what had happened. A kind, calm, joyful woman. And such an ending. The following day, Vyacheslav was buried. At his funeral, the tone was different. This can't be real. He wasn't capable of this. To many, he was still the respected coach and head of a youth soccer school, a caring mentor to boys and girls on the field. Neighbors said the family had always seemed exemplary. "He always said hello, polite, well-mannered. We never would have guessed," recalled residents of the building. Colleagues from the sports school said that up to his very last day, he appeared calm, involved in preparing for competitions, showing no signs of instability. The contrast between his public persona and the reality behind closed doors was striking. He could smile in front of others and threaten at home, be a role model to athletes and a tyrant to his family. The investigative committee opened a case under the statute related to a criminal act and launched an internal review into the police officers who previously failed to act on Tatiana's reports. But the investigation was quickly closed. The suspect was deceased. And with that, everything ended. A story that could have become a landmark case about protecting a woman turned into another statistic. His final words, finale, and 00 became symbols of the confidence with which he decided to close the chapter himself. The main concern became the future of their daughter. She had been nearby on the playground during the tragedy and witnessed the loss of her mother. Psychologists worked with her for a long time. Relatives surrounded her with care, shielding her from public attention as much as possible. Specialists noted, however, that trauma like this doesn't fade quickly. Recovery can take years. Public attention didn't disappear after the funerals. Across the Nizhny Novgorod region, Tatiana Timofeeva's story became a symbol of how systemic inaction can lead to irreversible consequences. People discussed how she spent months asking for help, documenting threats, warning authorities, and yet remained without protection. Tatiana's brother, Valery, said he would continue pushing for legislative changes to ensure cases like hers aren't closed without proper investigation. But legally, the case was over. Without an accused person, there could be no trial. The tragedy revived public discussions about the need for laws addressing domestic aggression, but over time, the interest faded. As so often happens, a wave of outrage rises, then disappears, while the underlying problems remain unresolved. The girl's life is slowly stabilizing, though the experience will leave a permanent mark. For Tatiana's family, her memory is not just sorrow. It's a reminder of the destructive impact of indifference. The story of Tatiana Timofeeva is a stark example of how even clear signs of danger and documented reports weren't enough to prevent tragedy. Each such case reinforces a painful truth. Society still tends to view domestic aggression as a private family matter. And Tatiana's words about self-worth, "I know so much about self-esteem and self-love because I know so much about the opposite," sound different. They echo as a warning to anyone living in a place where fear has become the norm.